Once you've ruled out the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampires, and there's a host of damned souls at Pelham House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. You can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Our regular host, Irene and Mark, is on holiday this week in Italy with her family. Bitch. Anyway, we want to wish her have fun out there in the sun, and she'll be back next week. So this is the Yank Mark Johnson taking over the duties for this week's show. Just want to mention a couple of things. We are coming towards the end of summer here. People may have noticed that there have been a lot of repeats played this summer. There's just been a lot of things happening. Summer is usually the slow season. We apologize for that. We're ramping up now with a bunch of shows and big block of shows that are going to be happening now for the next couple of months. So be sure to tune in every Wednesday night, 10 p.m. both Greenwich Mean Time for the UK and 10 p.m. Eastern Time here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Also, we have a lot of our great shows. If you haven't had a chance to tune in to any of those, on Thursday nights, we have a great lineup of shows, monthly shows and weekly shows with The Crypto Realm with Deborah Hatswell, Inside the Goblin Universe with Ron Murphy and Andy Mercer, Beyond the Supernatural, and, of course, Weird Tales. Also, there is the Paranormal Peep Show and Twin Souls. Great lineup of shows from a lot of our British hosts and guests, so definitely be tuned in for those. Now, we're going to jump right into the show tonight. Got a great guest, and really looking forward to talking with this gentleman. Our guest tonight is Steve Kull. Now, Steve is the founder of the Squatch Detective, and he has his website, thesquatchdetective.com, and I would assume being a Bigfoot investigator. And Steve, welcome to the program.
Hey, what's going on?
Now, Steve, just also mention to people you are an author. You have 2 published books out as well, and you've appeared on a number of different television shows as well. I see that you appeared on Paranormal Survivor. Well, I've also appeared on Paranormal Survivor a couple of years back during their first season. So, see you get to get around. Now, so tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in researching Bigfoot.
Well, all my life I've been a professional investigator, either on a full-time or a part-time basis, dealing with real-life scenarios, insurance investigation, accident investigation, crime investigation. My background is in criminal justice. As a small child, I actually got interested in the Sasquatch phenomenon when I sat down, I was probably 7 or 8 at the time, and I sat down next to my father watching this movie called Legend of Boggy Creek, which was airing on one of the premium channels at the time. And it scared the bejesus out of me because, here I am, an 8-year-old kid, and the scene opens up with an 8-year-old kid running through a field, trying to warn people about this creature that's, hearing in the bog or seeing in the bog. And
just to give away my age a little bit, I saw that movie in the theater.
Wow.
When I was a kid, and it got me hooked.
Yep. So as I became a teen, I kind of, I was more interested in girls and cars than I was in Bigfoot or anything paranormal, UFOs or anything like that. And then fast forward about 1998. Now I'm a seasoned investigator because at that point in time I've been doing investigation for, I'd say, about 8 or 9 years. So I was, and I ran into this book, that a friend had told me about, saying that there were Sasquatch sightings literally like an hour and a half from my house in New York. And I, over the years forgot, and thinking that, after watching the In Search of episodes, that, Bigfoot was a California, Oregon, Washington state thing. When in actuality, it's been seen in 49 of the 50 states. And so that's what started my foray. And I went into it believing, I bet you all this stuff is going to be a bunch of bunk. And as I spoke to police officer witnesses, firefighters who had seen it, a few scientists who had seen them, I quickly, in being a forensic interviewer, is like one of my tricks of the trade that I have on my repertoire, being an investigator. I was looking at these people, and I had realized that they were telling me a truthful story. Seeing their physiological reactions and goosebumps and jugular vein distension and shallow breathing. They were actually reliving some of these things they had seen, and I realized that they were telling me the truth. So, where did the truth really lie? And the more I found out, the more validity there was to it. Because if you're pitting a crime on a particular person, and you have this crime, and then you do another crime and another crime, and then all of a sudden the modus operandi all sounds the same, same description, same type of behavior, same attitudes, then you realize that, there's some validity in this, because we have people that don't even know each other from, maybe 80 miles away, 90 miles away, in my particular research realm, that are saying the same exact thing. And to me, that built a lot of validity into it. So that's how I kind of got my start into the whole Bigfoot thing.
So that begs the question, well, first of all, how many years total would you say you've been investigating now?
Approximately 20 now.
About 20 years. In that 20 years, have you seen a Bigfoot?
Absolutely.
You have?
I have. I have with my own naked eye. I mean, I've seen it through equipment. I've seen it on a FLIR. I've seen I had a couple of sightings with night vision, but the real ones the ones I like to talk to are my last two, which occurred in 2011 and 2012, back-to-back years on expedition, with my own naked eye. And that was really the ones that drove it home for me. The seeing it through equipment is one thing, but, because you'll see this outline and you'll see this green this green dark figure because you're looking through night vision, or you'll see this bright object in a FLIR and you'll see it, but nothing beats seeing it with your own naked eyes.
Where exactly did you have these sightings? Were they in upstate New York?
They were in the Adirondack State Park. Approximately on the east side of Lake George, approximately, I would say, about 10 miles out of Whitehall, New York, which, for many people know, Whitehall, New York is like the Bigfoot capital of New York.
Now, where I live, actually, I'm up in northern New Jersey, just about a mile and a half from the New York border. So we actually have our own Bigfoot up here known as Big Red Eye, around the Sussex and Warren counties. And I know some people who have had some encounters right here in Sussex County, New Jersey, sightings and other reports. They've even filmed some television shows here that will remain nameless. But it's people wouldn't think that New York, people, especially around the rest of the country, and I'm originally from Los Angeles, so I used to have the same bias. You think New York, you think New York City. You don't realize how rural and rocky and mountainous the rest of the state is, and how much habitat there could be to support a creature of this size.
Well, the Adirondack State Park is 2 million acres. You could put Glacier National Park, Yellowstone, inside of the Adirondack State Park and still have room to spare. So it is a tremendous area. Some areas get logged. Some areas actually have homes in it. But there is so much unexplored things. And a lot of people don't understand that agriculturally, New York State is big into apples, big into wine, and we also have a substantial amount of dairy products as well. So there's a lot of that. New York is more agricultural than it is city. You have the city hubs, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, Utica, Albany, and New York City, and Long Island, and those are your metros. But everything in between and thereabouts, like you hit the Albany area, north from Albany to the Canadian border, 90% of it is country. You go west to Syracuse, 90% of it's country. And if you go northwest towards Lake Erie, 95% of that is country. So it's a very, very mountainous area with a very diverse type of ecosystems. I mean, you have areas of the Adirondack State Park that has, pine, deciduous pine, fir tree coverage where it's, and then you have parts of the Adirondack State Forest that are strictly oak and maple and birch. And that's why, in October, when autumn hits here, a lot of people take to the North Country to look at the foliage. And that actually, because of that, we actually get an increase and a spike in sighting reports. And it was also the hunting seasons, too. So when people start taking to the woods, all of a sudden they start noticing these guys.
Now, here's the question for a lot of people who believe in Bigfoot. There are two camps in the Bigfoot community, which would be one camp is of the mind that these are an undiscovered primate, hominid creature that has been living here always, and we just haven't discovered it. Just like the mountain gorilla in Africa wasn't discovered until the 1920s. And they believe that it's an animal living here and is very good at adapting to its environment and avoiding people. There's the other camp that seems to put a much more of a high strangeness angle on Bigfoot, and that there's something almost paranormal about it. And I'm just curious which camp, if either, that you happen to find yourself in.
Well, you also forgot the third camp, which is the alien one, where people believe they actually are not of this planet as well, and that they're actually an alien implant. And then there's yet another camp that believes, in more of a biblical term, that they're Nephilim. I am in the firm belief that they are a primate. Now, whether they be pangolin or hominin, I'm not sure where they branch off. They may be something completely separate, a separate branch, neither pangolin nor hominin. Because, like I said, we just don't know. We know they're primate because definition of a primate is articulate hands and feet, large brain, small snout. Obviously the large brain has capacity to think. Chimpanzees have a problem, have a mind that problem solves, that has forward thinking and strategizing. So we should, and chimpanzee DNA-wise is the closest thing to us at like 94.6%. So they're very close to us genetically, and they have all this stuff. So why wouldn't a Sasquatch? Because I actually dare think that a Sasquatch DNA actually may be a lot closer to us than the chimpanzees. But we know that just a percentage of DNA change in a particular species can drastically change them. I mean, if you realize that a chimpanzee genetically is the closest thing to us, look at how different a chimpanzee is compared to us. I mean, a chimpanzee may only get to be about 5 foot tall, but they also have the strength of 10 of us. So, DNA is a very funny game, that it doesn't take much to be off by 1% or 2%, and it can change the whole structure of what you're looking at. So even if something is like a couple of percent off DNA-wise compared to us, it can drastically change the appearance, the habits of the creature. It depends on, exactly what part of the DNA is different. So, I'm very firmly believe that this is a primate because of just the sheer amounts of evidence and the behaviors that it exhibits. For example, a lot of people don't know that behaviorally, a Sasquatch acts like a primate. When its territory is incurred, it gets aggressive. When it sees somebody it doesn't want to see in a home range type of area, it just walks off. And a lot of the earlier descriptions of the creature was it's almost like a wandering male, or a wandering female for that matter, like it's trying to find its own troop, and that is right out of primate behavior. But there's also something called arthro, and that's why we think a bear may be playing peekaboo or a dog, and that I want to make sure we're not attributing to that, and that's why I had to take a look at a case by case basis on a lot of these reports that I feel that are valid. You have to look and make sure that some about that centrism isn't thrown into that report. So if somebody says, well, it was like playing peekaboo with me, I try to slide that aside, because the real important thing is, well, how did it react overall? Well, it saw me, it looked at me for a few minutes, and it walked away. The minutia of, well, it was peeking around a tree, to me, that exhibits a home range thing. It's a chance encounter, and that's what we do as even Homo sapiens. If we see a strange animal in the woods, like a bear, it's not posing a threat to us, what do? First thing we do is turn around, we walk away from it. We walk away from the bear. So you're seeing a similar type behavior. Now, if a bear walked into your home, you're going to have a different reaction to that, depending on if you have a gun handy. You're going to go after that bear. So similarly, when we have reports that have aggressive rock throwing, screaming, escorts, stuff like that, that may be more of a territorial type of thing, very much in line with primate behavior. And then the final thing is what we have is foci of activity areas. And for us Homo sapiens, that could be a number of things. That could be where we work or schools or malls. And depending on what that activity is, depends on our reaction a lot of times. Like if for example, a strange animal walks in a mall, like a dog runs through a mall, we may not think of it. It's not a threat to us. We're just going to let it walk on by. But if it walks into a school where we're protecting children, then we have a different type of reaction to it. Or even a different person walks in there that's not supposed to be there. We have a very different reaction to that. So, obviously when we look at Bigfoot reports, if something is, we try to look at that behavior and what it was doing to really, figure out whether or not it's either a foci area or territory, right? And a lot of times, if you plot these sightings out on a map, you'll start noticing little patterns that the more aggressive ones seem over here, yet over here there's more roadside crossings or walk-offs or people just having chance encounters, and over here there's kind of a mixture. Well, that all plots out very well to what a primate habitation model looks like. So it's to me, it's a primate. A lot based on that, a lot on based how it's described. It doesn't seem super intelligent, like something paranormal. I always say this. There's been people who've said to me that, I saw this creature and then it just like disappeared. And there's a couple of good explanations for that. Number one, I've had people say, well, yeah, it ran off the side of the road. I couldn't see where it was. It was like it disappeared. Well, we see the same thing with deer when they bound across the roads. Once it gets in the woods by about 3 or 4 feet, it's gone. We can't see where it is. You can stop and look. You may hear it, but you won't see it. Conversely, there's also a phenomenon that occurs in the biggest of the mammal genuses, I believe, if I'm breaking that down. Families, I believe. Again, I'm not a scientist, so this is, some of the stuff on the top of my head, some of it's not. But the biggest types of mammals, like the biggest dogs, the biggest cats, the biggest whale, will use what they call infrasound. And what infrasound is a very low frequency resonant sound that you can't hear with the naked ear. And what that does is it causes vibrations in the eyeballs, it causes vibrations in the ears, and it causes nausea, it causes feeling your hair to stand on end sometimes. It causes it causes people to feel like they're being watched, almost like EMS in the paranormal field. Well, like I said, the largest animals of species, the biggest cats, tigers and lions, have the ability to use infrasound. Elephants have the ability. The blue whale has the ability to use infrasound. I believe the biggest wolf, the gray wolf, can use infrasound. Obviously, it would make a lot of sense that if the biggest canine can, the biggest feline can, the biggest whale can, it would make a lot of sense and not too far scope out of science fiction to say, well, maybe the biggest primate will also have that ability too. And as far as I know, Sasquatch is described like the biggest primate. So it would too have that. And what that does is it may cause people to hear things, interpret things. It may cause them to have hallucinations. It may cause them, like I said, to hear things. And I think that may be an answer to some of the more paranormal aspects that people think a Sasquatch may have.
Now, I have heard it said in the past about the Sasquatch using infrasound in several occasions, and that's something that I've been looking into for a while now. Definitely, I think it's sometimes used as a defensive mechanism, where by emitting this ultrasound, it causes the person to feel so uncomfortable that they get out of the area. So there you have a nonviolent, almost non-confrontation, where you have the desired result of chasing off a trespasser in your territory.
Yep. Exactly. And that's the other reason. Either that, or a lot of people feel like they're paralyzed for some reason. Well, that too is another side effect of infrasound. That's why some of the big cats use that. They use that to paralyze and to disorient their prey before they strike.
Now, there have been reports of Sasquatch, appearing in newspapers or in articles going back into the 1800s, or the wild men, as they were sometimes called. Teddy Roosevelt even famously described a so-called incident with these trappers with Bigfoot.
The Bauman incident.
Yes. And then, in the 1920s, there were two very famous cases out of Oregon with the Ape Canyon incident with the miners who were trapped in a cabin overnight while they were being attacked by several of these Bigfoots. Between that and Albert Ostman's old account of supposedly being kidnapped by a family of Bigfoots and living with them for a couple of days. Now, some people can look at these and say, well, these are just wild tales. Where's the physical proof? But yet, back in the 1920s, when they were telling these stories, what was the basis for it? Where these tales of giant, hairy men of the woods or apes, that's where the Ape Canyon got its name in Oregon, because of this mining incident where they shot and killed a Bigfoot, and later they were retaliated against by a group of Bigfoot. Does that show an average, if these are truly just primates, do they have that level of intelligence and awareness to seek revenge?
Well, first, let me talk to a couple of points on those stories. Albert Ostman's account actually happened in British Columbia, and he did not report that until the 1940s. So it would have been 20 years before it had gained any kind of notice. And John Green in the early 60s spoke with Ostman about that and brought up a magistrate, and Ostman swore out an affidavit that what he had said was true. Ape Canyon, actually, I've done a lot of research on Ape Canyon. Ape Canyon was not named because of the Fred Beck incident. Ape Canyon was actually named by a group called the St. Helens Apes. They were a youth collective like the Boy Scouts that had been trotting around in there since the 1880s. And the the apes actually found the canyon, and they had discovered the cave, which soon collected their name, Ape Cave and Ape Canyon. So actually, it was the St. Helens apes that actually that's where Ape Canyon got its name from. To my surprise, because I believe that too, to my surprise, had nothing to do with Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or the Fred Beck incident.
That is fascinating. That's the first time I've ever heard that story. Yep. You learn something new every day.
Yep. But the Fred Beck incident, could that be misinterpreted? Was it an attack? Well, I dare say if there was 3 or 4 of them, they probably could have ripped through that cabin pretty easily. Could it have been a group of youthful ones just messing with him, playing with him, seeing if there was a reaction? I know there had been some reports of them coming on the cabin, on the porch and stuff like that, but we've seen that. And so could that be misinterpretation? Now we have the Bauman incident, which goes back to the 1880s, incorporating Teddy Roosevelt's Wilderness Hunter, where a couple of trappers were trapping stuff, seeing some. And I think there is some truth to that. About how much truth there is, like the murder and stuff like that, I do not know. I mean, nobody will know. But what I do know is that primates of one species rarely attack primates of other species. For some reason, we have a built-in taboo. And of course, there are some cultural differences, even with us and in chimpanzees, where, some groups of chimpanzees find it perfectly acceptable to grab a bunch of monkeys and have them for lunch. We find that too here in with Homo sapiens, that there are some tribes in Africa that will eat monkeys. In some places, monkey brains is considered a delicacy. But for the majority of us, it's kind of putrid and sad. I mean, how does one feel when they see, this gorilla got poached, on television? You see a poached gorilla on TV, you feel horrible. Well, that's just our primate instinct in us to find that repulsive. And scientists have found that one species of macaques will allow a group of another species of macaques to pass through their territory unharmed. They may harass them, but they allow them to pass through unharmed. But if it was the same species, it would be an all-out war. Now, think about that. Think about Diane Fossey being, bluff charged by gorillas all the time. She never got attacked by a gorilla. She was bluff charged, and she stood her ground and it ran past her. It was done to scare them. Very similar to what we see a Sasquatch doing when it rocks, throws, screams, and escorts. I believe, the chimpanzees tried to, beat their chest and make motions and make aggressive reactions, grab a stick and, shake it above their head and trying to intimidate Jane Goodall. But she stood her ground, and eventually they stopped doing that. Those are just, some examples of how primates are not normally aggressive, towards primates of another species. Now, I would dare say that, in the the mid to late 1930s, we had people encroaching on people, and it started a whole world war. That's how species of the same kind react. So, take it as what you will. I don't believe they're necessarily dangerous unless they are cornered. I really feel that their skill tactic is evasion, and they realize that we're an apex predator too, and they want nothing to do with us, and they just shuggy off, and that's really what I think they do.
Well, Bigfoot is the hide-and-seek champion of the world, let's face it.
Absolutely. Well, if you think about it too, they're completely camouflaged for their environment. I mean, so many reports I've gotten over the years of them very silently walking in. They're creepers. They will come in very quietly and make sure they're not seen, and they use, they're seen always standing next to trees, very close to trees, maybe looking around trees, under trees, even laying on the ground flat or crawling. There's been a lot of reports of that stuff, and a lot of it is not necessarily new either. I mean, I've caught a couple of these reports going back to as far as in the 1950s in some of my research. But talking with researchers around the country, I have found that, that a lot of this stuff goes on, and it all comes down to MO again. It's all the same actor in the play, whether it be the skunk ape of Florida, whether it be Momo out in Missouri, or whether it be, the Sasquatch of New York or California. They all kind of act very similar and use very similar tactics.
Now, have you conducted your field research mostly in New York State, or have you had the opportunity to also look in other parts of the country?
Well, let's see. I probably have been to a good couple of dozen states in search. I've been in Texas, Oklahoma, Oregon, Washington, Carolinas. So I'm Massachusetts, Vermont. It's been so long. But yeah, Arizona. I spent some time on the Navajo reservation, or the wonderful Dene people. I spent some time on the Apache reservation. So yeah, the Four Corners area. I've done research in all of them. I've been in the Chusca Mountains, the Carrizo Mountains, in search of these creatures, and have had some really near brushes actually in the Four Corners area. I've had rocks thrown at me in Oregon that I can't explain. Most of these experiences were with other people, so I was not alone in these assessments. The closest I probably ever got to one was actually in a place called Tisnos Post, Arizona, and we're sitting around a campfire, and one of the gentlemen around the campfire said, Steve, I think you better get your night vision. And because he had seen something, Arizona being very flat, there was a street light off in the distance, probably a good maybe half mile away. And it was elevated a little bit. So, you could see the street light, but there was a lot of scrub brush, at ground level. And he had seen something that actually obstructed that light. So he was figuring something very tall had just blocked that light out for a second. And there's no trees or anything to block that light out as well. So I decided to go, for whatever reason, I went the far side around the truck to grab the night vision scope. And I opened the truck door and I heard something rumble in the tree line about 10 feet behind me, 12 feet behind me. And it ran bipedally. And at that point, I didn't know if it was running towards me or away from me, but I ended up drawing my knife and spinning around because I didn't know what was going to happen. And it was actually running away. So, I just hear, bump, 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 and it was gone. And maybe a little commotion further away. So the next morning, there's a lot of, there's a lot of indentations in the sand. Of course, it's sand, so it really didn't leave a lasting. It's loose grain sand. It didn't really leave a standing impression, but there were some impressions there, but nothing castable. And something had actually knocked a barbed wire fence on the property behind there down, which was perfectly upright the day previous because we'd been messing around in there. So whatever that was, I don't know if it was a Sasquatch, but it ran away bipedally. It sounded very heavy, and it was like only 12 feet behind me. Can't say I saw it. Can't say I heard it or smelled it. But I have smelled one of them, and I know because I ended up getting that's another story we can get to. But yeah, I mean, I've been around the country, and a lot of the stories are similar. I know in Florida they seem to be a little bit smaller, and that may have to do with their type of diet and the basic ecology of the area and the heat and the climate. If it's a little bit warmer, they may be a little bit smaller. But it's been a real interesting ride, and it's always fun talking to people in different areas of the country about Sasquatch. And wow, I heard the same thing, 1,000 miles away in New York.
Well, in all the places you've you've traveled and investigated, what location has impressed you the most in terms of genuine Bigfoot activity?
Well, I have to say it's my own home state because that's where I've done the most research. We have our cold time. We have our times where nothing happens, and then all of a sudden the floodgates will open up. And 2010, we got a lot of sounds and stuff. We got whoop calls, rock clapping, tree knocks, unsolicited tree knocks. 2011, I had my sighting, and we kept hearing things moving around us. We would move down, and they would move away. And we actually, I don't know if it was 2011 or 2012. It may have been 2000. Yeah, it was 2011, where actually not only did I have my sighting, but later that night, two of the female researchers that were with me, including my fiancée Stacy, who at the time wasn't my fiancée. We were just researchers at the time. We had, her and another researcher, we had actually seen what I thought originally were trail markers. And I'm going, geez, we're not on the trail. I don't know why the state would put the trail markers there, and then it moved. So I wasn't looking at what was reflecting back at me wasn't trail markers, they were eyes. And they were very high up as well. They were at least 7 feet off the ground. And we also captured some, we kept hearing them in 2012. I just started firing off my camera, bop, 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 bop. I had a flash camera with me, and sure enough, I caught eye shine that was far away, and then my next shot, it had actually moved, and it actually came closer to us to get around whatever it was there to get away from us. It was just far out, though. I mean, all you could see was just blackness in these eyes, or the one eye, actually, and you could see it move actually closer. It was very interesting stuff. The following year in 2013, in 2012, I had also had a sighting of a 5.5-foot juvenile, completely by accident. The following day, the researchers found the track mark, and there was a lot of shenanigans going on in the camp. And that's the way they like to be. They entertain themselves with us. They like to entertain themselves with us. I mean, the primate naturally is curious. I mean, we all hear something go boom. We all go and we look to find out what it is. But the one night in, I think 2011, actually, is when I had my sighting of, I'm sorry, I'm getting my stories mixed up. 2012, I had the sighting of the juvenile. We had something that night, later the next night, we figured, okay, we all hunkered down. I got my recording going 24/7. Now, at that point in time, I'm going to put my recorder out while we sleep. And we were in our tents, maybe about 15, 20 minutes, and then we hear something pound on the hood of one of the cars. So we don't move. We're not going to move at all and see what happens the rest of the night. And, the rest of the night was quiet. The following morning, we inspected the cars, and I'm going to tell you, had anything hit the car, had it been an object like a tree branch or even an acorn, that would have left I had several dings on my car from acorns falling off of trees there. So anything that made that kind of sound, and we tried to imitate it. What would make a sound like that? And what made the closest sound to that was taking my hand and just slapping it on the hood of a car. And we couldn't explain it to that day. All caught on video, and it always seemed to happen about, all this stuff happened after we went to bed. So, in 2011, when I had my longest one, I actually walked out of my camp to get some batteries, and I grabbed the smoke, and I was shining my light down one side, and I spun my light around the other side, and there was one standing next to a utility pole on the dirt road, and it was looking back at me because I was shining the light on it, and I could see its eyes reflecting back at me, blinking. And I couldn't help but think what it was doing, since it was fall, all the leaves had dropped, it was basically spying on our campsite. Because all the teams were in, we had a fire going, we were all talking, laughing, taking a break, and I just happened to wander out very quietly, and there it was. So I think I caught it by surprise. And, I just froze where I was, and it wasn't until I moved my light that it decided to turn and walked around the southwest side of my camp. And then I get, the radio blurb on it that, hey, there's movement on the southwest side of the camp. And I'm like, yeah, I know, get out, get a team out here. And we took some video, and the video actually showed the dirt falling in from where it had stepped into the woods from the road. And just some amazing stuff. In 2013, we were out, and we sent a team along, and me and Stacy stayed in the camp. And within 15, 20 minutes of staying in the camp, we were just staying really quiet. We had a baseball-sized rock coming to camp, or flying in the camp. We could hear it hitting the leaves on the way down. I actually recovered that rock. I have that rock to this day. And it was like no rock near where we were. The rocks were probably, where those kind of rocks were, probably 200 to 300 yards away, more towards the west of the camp. So I'm not saying it launched it that far, but I think it may have grabbed one, and then it was just, chumming along, and then, hey, there's the camp. I don't hear anything. And what I think a lot of times is if they're not aggressively rock throwing, I think what they're doing is trying to see if they get a reaction. Like if you throw a rock one way, you may get a movement, and then you realize that something is there. And I think that's exactly what it was doing. Otherwise, it would have stepped in camp, because when I told you in 2010 we got a lot of sounds, we had one particular audio where we had me and there was another researcher by the name of Steve Kull. We ended up, who actually is a former U.S. Marine sniper, and we ended up jaunting off out of camp and going down the road a bit. And on review of the recording, it was maybe about 40 minutes after we left, we could hear some very gentle leaf movement and something grunting at the camera, just a very, and that was it. And then we heard a little more leaf crunching, and that was it, nothing else. So I think it realized that, nobody was in camp and wants to come in and take a look.
Huh. What would you say was your closest encounter? Like the one Bigfoot that when you shined the light over and there it was standing there, how far away from you was that?
Oh, that was a good 150 feet.
Okay.
It was at a distance. I was standing down at the cars. It was up at the pole, elevated a little bit on a hill. The nice thing is I had a good point of reference to how tall it was because it was standing next to the pole. So, it was just that incident really shook me for a bit. In fact, it's kind of funny. We actually took a video of me after it. The cameraman came over because I had a videographer with me. He came over at me, and you just see if anybody knows me, I have these narrow little eyes, but my eyes were big as saucers that day.
I'd imagine.
I was like, and and I don't care what people say, well, why didn't you get a picture of it? Yeah, why didn't I get a picture of it? I only had I didn't have a GoPro at the time, but I had an action camera sticking in one of my vest pockets. Why didn't I? Well, number one, I didn't really think about it. I was like, holy, there it is. And then my next reaction was, I better not move and see what it does. If I started fumbling, I know it was going to be gone. I started pulling out that pocket, and unfortunately, the vest of the time I was wearing had Velcro pockets, so it went, and that would have been it. I said, I'm out of here. So I just stood, I stood fast, and just finally when it got to be like, okay, this has been going on 40 seconds, let me shake the light a little, maybe it'll come towards me, maybe it'll kind of move a little bit. No, I just walked away. Said, see ya. And I think really what it was thinking was when I shined the light and I froze, it froze to say, well, after it turned, and I will say this too, it did turn once, kind of looking behind, almost finding an exit route, and then it turned around back at me, and then it just kept staring at me and blinking, and I think it was trying to figure out if I had seen it. So, once I had moved that light, it figured, well, maybe it does see me, I'm getting out of here, and off it went.
I've also heard stories from witnesses or people who have had experiences that talk about gift giving. They leave things for like food or something for Sasquatch, and they come back later and there's some kind of stick or rock or like something is left in the place of whatever the food was that was taken. Have you ever experimented with that or had any results with that?
Well, here's my a couple of things. I will tell you a straight out experience, and I will tell you some thoughts on experimentation. I think that anybody who leaves food on the ground for a Sasquatch is not practicing really good investigation techniques, because there are so many animals in the forest that could take that. You can't say if it's a Sasquatch. Even if a stick is returned, you can't say it's a Sasquatch, because you don't have any evidence to back that up. Okay, it took a piece of fruit. It took the meat. It took the watermelon. How do you know a Sasquatch took it? You don't. But I will tell you one very interesting experience. When I had seen the juvenile, and it was much like this, and like I said, the pounding on the hood of the car happened the night before. And this is the only reason why I give some merit to gifting. Now, some people may, do I expect a drawing back? No. Do I expect a neatly stacked pile of stone back? No, I'm not so believably in that either. May I expect something that's familiar to me back? Maybe, because here's what I'll explain happened. So the first night we were in, and that's why I didn't have the recording, we had actually came back driven out from the Chautauqua Lake Bigfoot Conference. And so normally it takes me an hour and a half at the time to get to my research area. Because I was in Chautauqua, it took me about 7.5. And then we had Nat Geo come in to shoot, it was also repackaged for Destination America's Sasquatch Planet. They came in and they did some face-to-face interviews, and they left. We were all beat, driving 7.5 hours, doing video tape interviews for 2 hours. We had to set up camp in the rain. Not very fun times. So we're all sitting up, and Melissa was the first one to go to bed. Her husband and I were sitting up, and Jeff, a guy from Georgia, Jeff from Georgia, he goes to bed. Wayne and I finally take it. Wayne goes into the tent with Melissa. I go into my tent. Well, I am a diabetic, so yeah, you know what happens. I'm asleep about an hour. I wake up. I'm going, got to use a tree. So I unzip that tent. I walk out, and off to my left, and I turn right around, and I look straight on at it, and it's running perpendicular to the trail that leads out to the cars, which, mind you, a year before was where my car was parked when I had the sighting of the 8-foot one. There's running a 5.5-foot one. Okay, I look at it, and I go to myself, nah, it couldn't be. So I use the tree, and I go back to bed, and I forget about it. Next morning I get up, Jeff is screaming, saying something left a birch log behind his Jeep. And the thing is Jeff didn't get his blanket and pillow until he was just about ready to turn in. And where this log was placed, he wouldn't have been. He would have had to have moved it to get to his Jeep, to open the back of it up, because it was right there at the base of the Jeep. And another thing too is because it had been raining, we were picking a lot of birch trees, because birch, the oil in birch, doesn't matter if it's wet or not. You put that in some hot coals and fire, after a few minutes it goes up like gasoline. So we've been collecting birch, and something had left a birch log behind it. Now I will reminisce of a story that Ron Moorhead of the Sierra Sounds talked about, how one year they came in to their camping lodge, and there was a hole in the roof, so they had collected a lot of pine branches to cover that hole up. And then the next morning they woke up, they found a pile of pine branches left in the camp for them. So I do see some correlation with that. As far as the gifting thing, we didn't leave anything for it the next night, and the result was we got a slap on a car hood. So I can't dismiss that kind of coincidence. But, you know, we have to be very careful in what we consider evidence and trying to to consider, offerings. Like I said, you don't want to put a plate of food out in my neck of the woods because you're more likely to get a bear or a coyote into your camp or near your camp than anything else. And as far as you know, you could be feeding something that's coming along every night and grabbing it. Now, as far as sticks and other stuff, I can't speak of that. I've seen some stuff that I think is pretty far-fetched. I saw a case in Texas where Bigfoot was leaving, crayon, people leaving picture books for them to read and stuff like that, and coming back and getting a return picture. I'm just not buying that. I'm just not buying it. Can't do it.
Now, have you ever had rocks or stones or branches thrown at you while out in the woods?
Oh, I numerous times. I mean, there was the camp incident in 2013. I was out in Oregon. I want to say it was 2006. Maybe it was 2007, somewhere in there. It was right around the year end. I had some rocks being thrown to me from a cliff, and they were landing very nearby. And I was with another researcher and a Joey, and we were hunkered down in one area trying to catch any movement on the cliff. And there was a lot of rocks falling, like something was walking up there. But then every once in a while, something would throw a good-sized pebble or rock, maybe the size of a marble, at where we were hunkered down. And usually it would go whizzing by, or you'd hear it drop in front of us or drop behind of us. And it finally got to the point, well, you know what, we're going to get out of here. It's getting kind of creepy because it's picking up. I was in Wisconsin, had a branch tossed at me, and when we filmed Monster Quest in 2006, a couple of our researchers from the Nesler team, actually one of the guys was having pine cones thrown at him and it hit him in the back. And that was our remote team that was way out. And he came tooling back. And that was actually that was actually on the Monster Quest where I was talking, because I turned around to him. I said, I remember saying this very bluntly, Kevin, what the hell's going on out there?
What are your thoughts on some of these investigators? Of course, this has been made popular by a couple of television shows who go out and try doing wood knocks or simulating howls in order to try to get a response. I'd like be interested in your take on that, because my take on it is, if it is a form of communication, how the hell do we know we're doing it right? And especially with these howls, pretending to do a Bigfoot scream, will these things be able to tell right away that ain't one of us?
I'm sure they don't, but you know what? I'll tell you a couple. I'll tell you my take on it. It can't hurt. A lot of people say that, well, you don't know what you're saying to them. You're right, I don't. I'm looking for a reaction, any kind of reaction. Doesn't matter. I'm just looking for a reaction. Let's see what this brings. The message doesn't have to be understood at this point in time. I really think they tree knock for GPS to tell them each other where they are. I think howls are for different reasons. If all the howls are authentic and not misidentified. But have I done it in the past? Absolutely. Do I still use it? Occasionally. Some places you don't need to. I've been to a place in Massachusetts. I don't need to use a wood knock. In fact, they start as soon as I come walking around. Or any of the team goes walking around. They start. And then it usually ends with something being pushed over. Like it's almost trying to display a little bit. But as far as, call blasting and tree knocking, tree knocking, it depends where you are if I'm going to employ them. If I'm in an area that has no population anywhere near me, no people, I may tree knock. And what I try to do is I try to see if it's a person, because I try to, the shaving a haircut. If I start getting tree knocks back and forth, let me try this one. I'll do shaving a haircut, and I'll wait for the two bits to come back. And if it's two bits, I can tell you it's a human that's been tree knocking with me.
Yeah, that's a funny image in my mind of like two guys on opposite ridges Bigfoot hunting, and they're both like tree knocking or doing calls out to each other, thinking they're each talking to a Bigfoot, and they're just really talking to each other.
Right. So you got to reconnoiter your area very well before you do all kinds of stuff like that. However, I do not do it with my voice anymore. I use my tree knocks come from a call blaster, and any of the calls I use from a call blaster. Do they elicit results? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The only thing I'll do is I do have some whoop calls on there, and I'll tell you, I used to when I first got in there, and a lot of the newer researchers will get in there and they'll try to be all stealthy. Oh, you need to descent yourself. Well, number one, if you know a Sasquatch is a primate, you don't have to worry about descenting yourself, because the fact is the Sasquatch is not going to be using its nose as its primary detection device, like a bear or a hog or a raccoon would, or a dog, because we don't have very big snouts. Unless you're Lieutenant Klinger from MASH.
Or me with my schnoz.
But I mean, you think about it, a dog has like over 1 million scent receptors. We have about 50 to 60,000. So a Sasquatch having an extremely flat nose, as is reported, may even have a lot less scent receptors than we do. So I really think what they tune in on is the hearing, what they hear. In a lot of Sasquatch reports, they have a lack of earlobes. Nobody ever seems to see an earlobe with a Sasquatch. Now, if you think about humans, why do we have? What's our earlobes function? And we use them like radar dishes. That's why we find it easier to listen to somebody when we look at them. Even in the old days, you catch all the pictures of people, always sitting with their face. If they're not looking directly at the radio in the golden age of radio, they were sitting faced toward the radio. They may be reading a paper or whatever, but they're facing the radio because our ears hear better in front than they do anyplace else. But that's because of the earlobes. Now, if a Sasquatch doesn't have earlobes, guess what? It gives it a very keen sense of hearing in an omnidirection. So it can hear stuff behind it to the 6 o'clock, to the 8 o'clock, to the 10 o'clock, to 11 o'clock. So it knows. The other thing, too, is with the eyesight and the reflection that's been seen in so many cases and reported, and even my own encounter, one encounter, it has a tapetum. So a tapetum is the mechanism in an animal that gives it night vision. Now, I had to think about long and hard about that, too, because are there primates that have tapetums? And there actually are. There's about a dozen primates that have a tapetum. So it's not unheard of that a primate can have one of those mechanisms in the eye. So it's not science fiction. It's a good science possibility. And that's a lot of stuff that, when I started formulating ideas, and that's when I wrote my second book, which is What Would Sasquatch Do? A lot of these ideas formulated, but I never took it like one step out of science. Like people think that their eyes can bioluminesce. Well, name me a mammal that can bioluminesce. None. Name me a vertebrate that can bioluminesce. Well, maybe some fish, but that's a creature that breathes water, so that's not even a mammal. So you have some theories that can be discounted, like bioluminescence. I've heard these theories. Oh, the Bigfoot cloaks. Well, these creatures down in the sea, they can cloak. Yeah, but it's not. We're not built. We're mammals. We're not built for this type of having these type of mechanisms. So I always try to keep it real, and so that's how I think they really detect us. You're never going to sneak up on one. So, you start off when you first get into this trying to be all sneaky and quiet. Well, try to be sneaky and quiet around a deer. They go on alert right away. But if you're just hanging around, you just might have a deer come walking by. Well, I really think that if you make a little bit of noise, whether it be tree knocking, howling, whatever, fireworks, a firing, and you don't want to do fireworks in the forest anyway. But a campfire with a lot of people, just sitting around talking, keep your eye on your tree line, because they're going to come in and take a look at you. You have evoked their curiosity. We are their television. Primates need mental stimulation. They just can't sit and do nothing. They need to be doing something, focusing on something. And that's, that's the one way I've realized, and that's why I think when we started trying to change up the tactic, instead of trying to try to hunt them down, let them come to us and then just be on the alert for it and act casual about it, kind of fool them. And that's the only way you're going to do it, because you're not going to make them do anything they don't want, but you can make them do what you want through subterfuge.
Do you think that we're ever going to capture one and prove they exist?
I don't know. Capture one, I don't know. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of, no-kill folks. There's some kill folks. I've talked to several hunters who said they could never pull the trigger on one of them because the way they look very human-like in the face. Of course, so does a gorilla, so does a chimpanzee. They have eyebrows and expressions, and that's why we have an affinity to dogs as well, because they have eyebrows and they have very human-like eyes and very sad eyes. So so that makes it very difficult for like your average Joe hunter to shoot one. But I think that the way to go is to get a provable DNA sample rolling. And people say, well, they're just going to say, well, what I mean by provable is use a combination of technology traps. Get a trail cam photo of it grabbing a piece of fruit, recovering that fruit forensically correct, and having, whatever it is, the saliva, that whatever was left on that particular remains, have that tested. That may yield the DNA. And then if you have a trail cam picture of it actually, consuming that, and an audio to back that up, science is going to have a real hard time saying that didn't come from a Sasquatch.
It also seems like the Sasquatch have an ability to sniff out electronic devices, whether it's because of their acute hearing, maybe they're sensitive to electromagnetic fields. There seems to be very little results in terms of trail cams of catching evidence. In fact, people have reported, researchers have reported that they have a lot of activity in the area until they put up a trail cam, then everything ceases, because it's like these things know they're there. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's either that or it's out of frustration. I mean, you can put a trail camera, it's a needle in a haystack. Oh, I put up a trail camera, it disappeared. Well, you put up one trail camera. I put up two trail cameras. I put up three. And the amazing thing is, guess what? In all the years of deploying my trail cameras, never gotten a deer. Not one. Not one deer. So what does that tell me? That tells me, as an investigator, that these are just needles in a haystack. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll always trip. I'm sure there's times you can get in front of a trail camera and it doesn't fire off. Possibility of that. I also do know that, I deployed a trail cam at a bait station, a hunting bait station. That time I yielded plenty of deer, and one particularly very curious bear who actually noticed the trail camera. So if a bear can notice a trail camera, it's nothing supernatural that a Sasquatch should. People want to kind of overcomplicate things. I mean, the fact is, yes, they probably do. But you see, here's the interesting thing. The electronic mechanism in the cameras only go off when the photoelectric eye is broken. There is no IR until it shoots off. So, there's people who say, I think they can see an IR, and that's why, well, it's a photoelectric beam. It's an electronic eye. It's not even IR. Don't believe me? Look at a trail cam, set it up, look at it sideways with a night vision scope. You don't see anything. It's just part of the tree. But you flash that off, and you'll see a big, bright flash in your IR scope. So, these things do not give off energy all the time. It's just a photoelectric cell, the simplest of devices, because photoelectric cells have been around for years. There was never a film tram. The excuse that they see on IR, it was never explained in people who actually had film trap cams that used them. There was never, and a lot of people don't understand. There were people in the 70s deploying film trap cameras to catch a Sasquatch on film, and that didn't work either. The reason is because you have night vision, and what's that on that tree over there? That doesn't belong there. That's an anomaly. It doesn't take long for a deer or something that travels its own environment for many, many times to realize that, hey, wait a minute. Or perhaps even it might have been in the daytime when you're setting this camera up, or whenever you were setting this camera up, that maybe it heard you setting it up and it actually saw you setting it up. Now think about how we dress. We dress in camouflage. And think about what they see. They see people walking in with these long sticks. We call them guns, to go hunting, and they're wearing camouflage. So maybe that's an area I need to avoid. And they do. So I think that's a big part of it. Like I said, they're primates. They're forward thinkers. They strategize. Chimps do it. Gorillas do it. Sure as Sasquatch does it. Humans do it.
How there's so many reports of Bigfoot coming into almost residential areas. You hear the stories that they seem, they try to avoid people, they stay hidden, and yet even here in my neck of the woods, so to speak, the last report about 18 years ago, it was running in the newspapers where they were hearing calls at night and something was coming into town. People had some sightings, was getting into people's trash, which, could be a bear. We have a hell of a lot of black bear over here.
Absolutely do.
Yep. But there have been a lot more reports of these things coming into almost residential neighborhoods. Have you heard or experienced anything along those lines?
Well, I actually have. There has been, farmers who reported them walking in between their barn and house. There have been, maybe not so much neighborhoods, but, and there was a sighting reporting at the end of a dead-end road, which has a lot of forest, but it also has several homes as well. And they were seen coming in. Abear Road, the whole incident in Abear Road up in Whitehall, the subject of Seth Breedlove's film, The Beast of Whitehall, the incident at Abear Road, that was surrounded by a number of incidents that was happening in kind of a residential area, but it's surrounded by the forests. There was the Gaelic farm in Vermont, right by the preserve, that they had actually had one come up on their porch, and that was 40, 50 years ago at this point in time, but they actually reported it coming onto the porch. Of course, we know about the legend of Boggy Creek in the South Arkansas, with the forts where, they had basically were under siege. There was another gentleman in Honobbe, Oklahoma, back in the 90s that had a very similar thing, and something kept raiding his deer locker near his home, and they were coming on the porch. They were shaking the doorknobs. They were, they could see the shadows, and they ended up eventually, firing at these creatures, and it didn't seem to scare them. They just kind of hung around still. They couldn't understand it. Why? And a lot of times they would hunt and they would kill a deer and they would go to get the deer and the deer was gone. Well, what happened was these guys had equated the firing of the gun to the dinner bell. No, they just dropped us a deer. Let's go get it. And if they didn't get it, they would come in at night and grab it out of the deer locker, which was, off to the side of the house. So, and eventually what they did was they stopped hunting the deer, and the situation ended. But yeah, it's multifaceted.
Now, there are reports of Bigfoot hunting deer and feeding off of deer. And one of the popular reports in recent years is people supposedly finding deer carcasses with the necks broken, the necks twisted around, the heads twisted around. Is there other predators in nature that do anything like that? Like with a mountain lion, I know the mountain lion usually goes for the throat when they make a kill, but do they ever twist the neck around? And have you ever come across any carcasses like that?
The answer to that is yes, I have. It was actually in Alabama. But let me explain how a predatory animal attacks. And it does go for the throat. Like a mountain lion will go for the throat, as will a bear, a pack of wolves or coyotes. But the first place they attack is the hindquarters to bring the animal down. So when you see a cat attack, you should see a fair amount of slashing in the rear hindquarters. Same thing with the bear. You should see a fair amount of slashing. Bear claws are just as dangerous as big cat claws. Dogs, you'll see a lot of nips and bites to the back end, and they bring it down, and then they go for the throat. But I'll tell you one, I had seen a cow carcass in Alabama, and about a month previous to this cow's death, they did find a considerable 5-toed, no-arched track on the pasture, in the pasture, I should say. A couple of weeks later, this cow mysteriously, they found it laying, on the middle of the ground with no real apparent injury. They couldn't understand why it had died. Well, what had happened is by the time we got down there, the underside of the carcass had gotten eaten by insects, which was actually a good thing for us, because in looking at the carcass, the upper half, which was laying on the ground, the upside, facing the sun, you could see that there was no signs of trauma to its rear hindquarters, and really no signs of trauma at all until you got to the belly area. And there was no claw marks or anything indicative that it had been taken down. I flip it over, and the neck socket, the cranial socket where it meets the vertebrae, was popped out. So its neck was broken. The other interesting thing was its jaw was also broken cleanly. So it almost like something took it and just snapped its neck. Grabbed it by the bottom jaw, grabbed it by the upper jaw, and just went twisted. So I found that very fascinating. But yes, I do believe that that's the way they would kill. I mean, understand a Sasquatch, if it has primate teeth, they're not necessarily meant for taking a item of prey down by biting into it. They're made for they don't have claws. What they're made for is taking it and wrestling it down and perhaps breaking its neck, or perhaps using a tool to kill it. That's about it.
Now, have you ever investigated reports outside of the United States? I know there's been reported sightings in countries and continents all over the world. Or have you, in fact, our co-host Irene has told stories about where she lives in Wales. There's the local, they call it the Trey Moor. Right. And she has heard in her little valley there around the Carmarthenshire countryside, usually in the fall, she's heard the calls up in the hills of these things calling to each other. And I keep telling her, well, you better get that recorder out in the fall, because if they start doing it, I want to hear it.
Yeah. I have not been. I have only done one investigation, and it was not on Bigfoot outside of the United States, and that was in Scotland when I did the truth behind the Loch Ness Monster for Nat Geo and Sky TV.
Okay. Now, the The other, where was I going to go with this? When you're out in the woods, people, there are people who live in the woods their whole lives. They're out there hunting. I grew up hunting. I don't anymore. That's just my own personal choice. But I've camped with scouts. I know how to go out in the woods, and sometimes you can talk to other people who are experienced woodsmen, and they'll have some strange encounters. And I'm not talking about necessarily Bigfoot here. I'm talking about something else. I have a good friend of mine. I don't know if you know Tim Stover, out of Ohio.
Yep.
Yeah, Tim's a great guy, and he's told a few years back there was this one summer where he was encountering these balls of light in the woods, and I was wondering, when you're out hunting for Bigfoot, have you ever experienced anything else that was strange or unusual that may or may not be related to what you're looking for?
I am not personally. I can't say I have encountered anything out of the norm in the woods except a Sasquatch.
Yeah. I remember getting a call from Tim one night, and I told this story a couple of times on this show, where he was out squatching one night and out in the woods, and all of a sudden this ball of light floated right up to him and hovered off the ground just a few feet from his face. And he watched it for about 30 seconds, and then he got the notion to grab his camera to take a picture of it, and once he moved, boom, it was gone.
Well, the interesting thing, and I tell this to folks too, is that, just because you're looking for Sasquatch out in the woods, it doesn't necessarily mean that the paranormal may not, the paranormal may happen while you're in the woods too, depending on where you are.
Mm-hmm.
It may be just a separate phenomena. It's not, and I know there's some fringe group out there saying, well, that's the Bigfoot just in other form. Can you prove that? Can you just show me?
Right,
anything?
Exactly.
Yeah, if I had seen the similar thing, I would say, well, that had nothing to do with Bigfoot. That was all paranormal. And I'd be very interested in the history of the ground I was standing on.
Now, you've also spent some time investigating cases that have made the news. Either they've shown up on television programs or they showed up in news reports of people who've supposedly found Sasquatch bodies. There's Tom Biscardi's infamous, Bigfoot in a freezer.
Oh, absolutely, yep.
Yeah, and you could tell us about a couple of those that you looked into.
Well, when we get down to the 2008 hoax, I kind of invited myself along for that party to get out to see what was in that freezer. And when it was discovered, I was actually in the air at when they did the news conference. I was actually flying out to Indianapolis, and I forget which connection I had or where I had to go, but I think I flew in maybe to Cincinnati, but I'm not even sure at that point. Maybe it was Baltimore. I know I flew back via Baltimore, from Indianapolis to Baltimore, and then I think it may have been Baltimore. I'm not entirely sure my flight path out. But when I did get out there, understand that when that got uncovered, Tom Biscardi and Rick Dyer and Matt Whitten at the time, they were on the West Coast. They weren't even with this freezer. So Tom's son and I devised a little plan that we really want to get to the bottom of this, because we had heard Coast to Coast AM that Friday night, and we heard a guy saying that was his suit. I've seen the pictures. That's my suit. I designed it. And then we heard Lorman Coleman talk, and I remember TJ and I just looked at each other, and we had this suspicious eye. So we ended up wanting to put some heaters in the truck to defrost this thing, because they were supposed to have picked it up, thawed out. They picked it up frozen. It was under a block of ice. And so we end up heating the trailer up to like 120 degrees. And it was so hot in that trailer, the insulation started melting out of the freezer. And eventually we took a hammer to some of the ice, and we actually broke some of the ice, and I got the foot out. I'm going, that's a rubber foot. Whole thing's a hoax. So then there was a little bit of wrangling that, well, we need to get, the investors' money back, blah, blah, blah. And it was like a big stall tactic. And I was willing to hold my tongue for a couple of days, see if we get the money back. And then it came to Monday night, my show, when I promised everybody I'd tell them. Unfortunately, I will say this, that I should have probably never went on the air. I should have went on the air for like 5 seconds and just went off. Because I opened myself up for questions. And at the time, I didn't have any information that Biscardi may have been involved in it. But that started trickling in on Tuesday morning when I was given the real email report of the DNA test. Because I didn't know you talked about the DNA test at all at the conference. I was in the air. And then it started to snowball. I said, well, he sent me a bogus DNA report. He changed the wording on it. So that started getting me to raise my eye. I got out of Dodge, got back home, started digging in, and it came down to me actually interviewing Dyer in February of 2009, where he took me to get the original. He took me to the store where he bought the freezer. And he showed me the display model on the floor. He went downstairs. He was going to be full disclosure. And he was like, I've admitted it, Matt's admitted it, we hoaxed it. Biscardi is not admitting he's hoaxing it. And that burned their britches a little bit. So they were willing to do whatever I wanted to do. Okay, I want to go here, 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 and here. And I did. I flew down to Atlanta. We went to dinner. We talked over about, where I want to go. Went to the hotel. We got up next morning, came pick me up, and we went. And we went to where they picked the body up. We went to where we went to the store where they bought the freezer. And that was the tantamount evidence, because that receipt proved that Mr. Biscardi could have never seen that thing frozen, because it turned out it was like 124 cubic. It was like 124 gallons of water that needed to be frozen in that freezer, and it would not have frozen in time because he bought it the night Biscardi flew in to take the pictures with the freezer. So it would have never been frozen at the time they took pictures of that. And, Tom admitted on Sunday, which is the last conversation I ever heard, because I was silent. At that time I was so angry, and Tom was trying to cover up this hoax with another hoax by trying to get us to sign non-disclosure agreements and saying that, let's just say the boys took the body back, the public pressure was too great, we'll just sign a non-disclosure agreement and never talk about it again. I'm like, no. That's not going to happen. And that's why I remained silent the rest of the calls that Biscardi was making that Sunday. But he did. Finally, the cameraman that was there, the videographer they had, finally said, Tom, what did you see? He goes, I don't know. They opened up the freezer. It was frozen. And I just touched the ice a couple of times and they closed the freezer. And that's not what he said on like he said on a dozen news reports previous to that. So now he's telling yet another version. And I proved that version was false too. By getting that receipt.
Well, Biscardi's name has been floating around for a few years. And when the whole Bigfoot in a freezer debacle came out, he was already known as a hoaxer, and yet the media still ate it up. They ate it up like, oh my God, yeah, this guy and Tom Biscardi. And once I heard his name was involved, I'm going, are you kidding me? This guy's been involved in so many hoaxes. And then, of course, it turned out to be yet another hoax, and then everybody shrugs their shoulders and walks off. It's like...
understand how this operates. In 2005, we had the Stagecoach Nevada incident, which, let's face it, he came in... Where has Biscardi been known to hoax? And people will say, well, Stagecoach Nevada. Okay, that's right. He did say a bunch of things on Coast to Coast AM, got proven wrong, and it turned out He made some statements that he was trying to hype a service. Okay. Well, let's sit back. And again, he's not one to necessarily go out and fabricate stuff himself. He'll find somebody that is fabricating stuff, and he'll make it sound like the best thing since sliced bread. And then when it's time, when it gets all unraveled, he turns around and says, "Oh, well, I've been duped." And, if he is, the world's greatest Bigfoot hunter or the godfather of Bigfoot, whatever he wants to call himself now, well, he's been duped twice in a very public way. So whether he's been duped or whether he's hoaxing, it doesn't matter. But, I know factually, especially getting the police report, because I did file a FOIL request and got the 89-page police report on the whole thing. It's very clear that he had operational knowledge of all the shenanigans that were going on. He was the only one that did not write, and he was the only one that had the most contact with Dyer and Witten, and he was the only one that never gave a written account of anything, other than the point at something that I had written that got edited by the vice president of Searching for Bigfoot, his second in command. And that was the only thing. That was the only thing he said, what he said. Well, wait a minute. That's not a statement. And that's why, charges never were brought against Dyer and Witten because, and the whole money thing. They got to keep the money. Because the police at that point in time, the last entry into the log was saying, well, there was an auction going on of the suit. And Biscardi had told me that, I knew nothing about it. And really? I didn't know. And then he turned around and he bragged about the dollar amount it was up to. And then it was right there in the police report. He showed he had working knowledge that the auction was going on. So the next day they shipped it out to the DA, and of course it got all squashed. So that's what happened. And there was also an argument who the real complainant should be, because the investor said, no, I loaned the money to Tom. And Tom insisted that, no, I was only going to pay him back if it was real. And that would have all been solved. Charges may have been brought if Biscardi came forward and actually pressed the charges, like he said on the radio he was going to, and like he said in interviews and papers he was going to. And, of course, nothing ever happened with that. And that whole thing is actually the subject of my first book, 50 Large, the real story of the Georgia Bigfoot body hoax. But there's been other players that are continuously hoaxing. There's work by Mr. Todd Standing out there from Canada that puts a lot of strange headshots of Sasquatch, and it's very complicated minutia to really explain over the radio, other than the fact that he had one we called Puppet Face, and then we had another one we called there was Puppet Face and I forget the other one, Monkey Face or Gorilla Face or whatever it was. But they're very clearly not real Sasquatches. And the pictures, if you take down what the settings on the cameras were, they were not set for a outdoor environment. There's another person that does a blog called Bigfoot Ballyhoo, the Bigfoot Ballyhoo blog, and that site's run by Linda Newton Perry, and her stories can never be corroborated. In fact, we've actually exposed some of this alleged team that was talking to her, and we've actually found pictures of on the internet of things that she says are other things to kind of add to her story. And my guess is she's just writing an online story thing, but she'll deny it vehemently if you confront her about it and say, no, this is all real, but it's not. So there's been numbers of hoaxes that go on. And right now in my day, when I first started this, I used to try to tackle them all. Now I only tackle the ones that come to me or necessarily or have a human interest aspect of it. Last year there was a gentleman that was not returning money for expeditions to people, Bigfoot expeditions, that he got shut down on. And, of course, people are looking for this money and, oh, I ain't got it. This person's got it. No, he's got it. No, he's got it. No. Well, the funny thing is that the PayPal receipt went to this guy, nobody else. So, and it's very sad that has to occur, but it does.
Well, the hoaxers are like the bane of all of us in research because it's bad enough that we're trying to prove that something exists without having to deal with the hoaxers who go out to debunk it and make us look ridiculous and throw water on the whole thing, because the media certainly, they never talk about it with a straight face. You always get what's called the snicker factor. Or they play, scary music in the background whenever they report on a sighting, or they're barely containing their own laughter. And it's a shame because so many people have had these encounters, some of them very frightening. And yet, our modern society just doesn't want to accept it, at least not mainstream society. Now, there's the famous, the body in the freezer, but there's also that much older case of the Minnesota Iceman.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that was part of the agenda, that he had seen the Minnesota Iceman, because it's and I didn't really study the Iceman because it was really before my time by a few decades. But as a point of reference, I mean, very similar in aspect the second time around when Mr. Dyer decided he had another body. And believe it or not, he had convinced a whole bunch of other people that he had a body again, even though we were through 2008. And all he was collecting was all the new people to research. And you would not believe how many times that we have to repeat ourselves, because some of these newer researchers will pull something old out of the closet and say, hey, look at this. And I look at it and go, yeah, that's been debunked for years. That was a hoax, or that was debunked as this. I mean, I've even seen something I debunked years ago that was, and then somebody tried to argue with me about it. I'm like, well, I have the PDF report. I know exactly what the rock formation is behind it. So you can argue all you want. It's not a Bigfoot.
Well, what do you think is some legitimate evidence? I mean, let's talk about one of the more famous pieces of evidence out there, the Patterson-Gimlin footage from 1967. What is your thoughts on that particular footage?
Well, I look at that footage and I here's the thing, and this is very, people have to put this in reference. What are the signs of a good film versus a bad film? Well, a good film has some photography beforehand, photography after the encounter, and some general timeline information. So, okay, if that's all good, let's go on. And the Patterson-Gimlin film did have that. It had some before shots and other canisters of film, them going into the canyon and other stuff. And then, after the thing, them casting tracks and doing stuff and looking around. To me, that screams of authentic. They had the timeline. Yes, this is when it happened. This is the time of day it happened. This is exactly what happened. Here's the story. This is what we did afterwards. Then we met Al Del Atley, and we flew it to the Kodak lab to go to Red, and then we watched it on Sunday morning, blah, 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 blah. Makes all the sense in the world to me because there's a timeline, and they put it out there. What we get is, wow, I was in the park, and look what I saw. And you just get a 20-second video, and that's it. That screams to me of hoax. Nothing before, nothing after, no story behind it.
Yeah. And there are times when people think, well, in this day and age, everybody has a cell phone with a camera on it. So why isn't anybody shooting more video of these things? And it's like, well, as someone who has tried to capture things, I can't even get a good picture of my dog who's doing something funny, and the second I grab my camera to go film it, she'll stop and just look at me like, what?
Right.
And the opportunity is gone.
Well, let's look at it a couple of ways. Number one, the technology we have, if it's in the woods, all these electronic devices focus on the first item they come across. So that's why Bigfoot's blurry, because the camera's not being focused on Bigfoot, it's being focused on what's between you and the Bigfoot. So even taking a picture in a parking lot of somebody, if there's a car in front of me and there's a person 100 feet away from that car, I'm trying to take a picture of that person and it catches part of that car, it's going to be blurry because it's focusing in on the car. This I know, being a private investigator. Surveillances. You can't do a surveillance when it's raining out because you try to shoot out your window, you try to shoot video out your window, and your camera's going blurry every 3 seconds because of raindrops or windshield wipers. So it's very difficult to do that. Imagine now you're in woods and something's walking through the woods and you got leaves and trees and branches and whatever in between you and your subject you want to photograph. Of course it's blurry. And I always say this too. There is a trauma that goes on too with people, especially for the people. Hey, you may be a world famous photographer. You may have whatever. You see this thing for the first time. There is a delay in your brain because it's trying to interpret what you're seeing. If it's not in your belief system, you're going, what? And even if it is in your belief system, it is a shock to your system. So that causes a delay and go, oh, shoot, I got a camera. Except for in my case, I didn't say shoot.
Yeah, me either.
But you see, so the odds are stacked against us to shoot on the fly like that. And like you said, too, how long's the sighting? It's going to last 15 seconds. Well, by the time you get your camera out, powered up, necessarily from off, but unlock your screen, get the app up, aim the camera, focus it, and shoot. I dare anybody to do that in under 10 seconds. So it's very difficult. But as an investigator of this mystery, I always say a picture, an audio, and a video is only as good as the story behind it. If you have a crap story behind a video or a picture or anything, then why even go on to the photo analysis? That's why when you look at the Patterson-Gimlin film, it warrants good photo analysis. And you see muscularity, and you see, movement, and you see natural movement. I, for one, believe that Patterson-Gimlin film is authentic. And I've also talked with Bob Gimlin personally. And I've studied him. When I met him for the first time, that's what I do. I'm a forensic interviewer. I'm sizing him up. And what I see is a very genuine guy, a guy who cares about people, who's gentle with people, that, doesn't want to hurt people. So I see somebody that's genuine and a stand-up guy. So I don't think it's a hoax at all. The Freeman footage, and a lot of people like to point out that Freeman had kind of a checkered incident. But I'm going to put that aside for a minute because he was a forester and he was in Washington a lot. And, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a story to that whole video. Hard to press. Now, then there was the Memorial Day footage, which seemed a little plotty. You don't have much video before the incident. You definitely don't have much video after the incident. And you have a lot of talking that got exposed years later. So, you got to look at each incident very carefully. But if you see a 10-second video of Sasquatch and somebody just being nonchalant about it, with generally it's garbage. I did one misidentification photo. The guy's name was Jim, and his photo was appearing everywhere. So we reached out to Jim, and he gave us soup to nuts, everything about that. It was a film camera he had taken. He actually gave us the index print of the film. He took scans he scanned the index print. He scanned the negatives. So we had the negatives, we had the index print, we had the picture in question. And he gave us the GPS coordinates he had because he was a hiker and he was with his girlfriend, and they didn't notice anything. And there was no real spectacular story behind it other than this is what I did that day, this is what happened, this is what I noticed, this is what I observed, and we left. And then the next day we went home. Well, here's a guy that's telling me the whole story, giving me the everything. Now it wants an investigation, and I sent an investigator out there, and guess what? We found that the whole back wall was contained. The back wall. Now, mind you, his picture was taken in the fall. We were up there, and my investigator was up there in the summertime, but the whole back wall was black rock, and even through the green leafery, you can see the separate points of where you could see black rock behind it. Which, if the leaves fall at the same time of year, that's going to be the same, pretty much the same little black patch that you see in the film. It looks like a Bigfoot. Or actually 2 Bigfoots. And, of course, people now, here we are 12 years later. Or 12 years later, what am I saying? That was 2006. Yeah, so I'd say about 12 years later. Oh, what do you mean? I don't see those points. Oh, whatever. You haven't studied the picture as long as I have. And, there's people like that want to believe everything, and there's people that don't want to believe everything. To be a good investigator, you got to kind of fall somewhere in the middle. You got to keep an open mind, but an open mind doesn't mean throwing out reality. And that's my first 2 tenets of Bigfoot research on my website: is keeping an open mind, but don't, keeping an open mind doesn't, mean living in science fiction or fantasy or throwing out the rules of science. Number 3 is always tell the truth. Number 4 is responsibility for us to educate, which I believe that if you're going to be involved and be a good researcher in doing this stuff, you need to educate the people. I know there's people hate the term expert in the Bigfoot world, and I'm not an expert, not amongst my colleagues, but amongst the laymen, we're all the experts because we've been in the field, we've had experiences, and an expert is just a point of reference. It's not an official title. It's a point of reference. Compared to, it's a comparison. If John Q. Public walks up to me, well, I'm going to be the expert. Just like, when, somebody asks me, give me the signs and symptoms of a cheating spouse. As a private investigator, I know them. And I'll go A, B, C, D because I'm the expert in that particular case. But if a psychologist walks in or a marriage counselor, I'm no longer the expert, am I? They're the expert. So being an expert is only a point of reference, and people get their testicles in a tirade about that sometimes. Oh, you got built as an expert. That's a big deal. It's how they see you. It's how they perceive you, not the other way around. But amongst my Bigfoot researchers, I'm not an expert. I'm just a colleague.
What would you say was one of the more fascinating cases that you ever investigated?
Let's see, the most fascinating case. Well, I still go back to Whitehall 2006, where there were 2 separate sightings within an hour by 5 separate people, and there was a little party going up on a hill, just people hanging out, burning a fire, chit-chatting, and the 3 girls walked down the hill. And they had encountered in the middle of this hill this 8-foot-tall black silhouette object. And they stopped about 30 feet away. And they were like, who's there? And they just got a grunt back. Ugh. So they went back up the hill. And they said, hey, listen, something's down on the hill. We're not sure what it is. So 2 gentlemen decided to escort them out of down the hill again. One had just gotten back from a tour in Iraq, so he was an active duty, Army or National Guard. I don't recall which at this point. So they go down the hill and nothing's there, but they do know that something pushed down a tree over the trail at the very end of the trail. So they step over it and they walk the girls across the road to the parking lot where they were parked at. There was a business establishment nearby, a gun club, and they all parked down there. So the 2 boys decided to walk back up the hill to kind of see if they can see what the girls had seen. And they get about halfway up the hill, and then out of the soldier's peripheral vision, he sees something out of the corner of the eye. And he stops, and his friend turns around and he goes, "You see that over my shoulder?" And what they had seen was again, another dark figure, but this time it was crouched down behind a bush. And it was 5 foot tall, even as it was crouching down. So they just turned around and they whipped out of there, and they kind of laughed about it, but it was kind of like a nervous laugh. When we went to visit that area, like 3 days after the encounter had happened, the soldier would not go up that hill. I don't want to go up there. And I had to kind of pull his teeth a little bit, and I got him to show him where he had seen it, and he went right back down the hill, and he stayed there. And me and another researcher, Bill Brand, and there was another gentleman there too. I forget who was with us at the time. Anyway, I managed to track from where it was crouched down. I managed to actually track it through the brush by looking at overhead tree breaks, and I followed it right down to the road, almost near the gun club parking lot, and it was gone. At that point, once it hits the road, I have no idea where it is. Well, the funny thing is, about a week later, we got a report about a half mile up the road from where that incident had occurred by another young gentleman who had seen one in the woods across the street from his house. And he was scared to bits, as was his mother. Because his mother said, yeah, he told me too, everything, blah, 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 blah. So, and they were very concerned about, again, safety. Is this thing safe? Is it dangerous? Is it, that was their major concern. So that is probably the most interesting thing, because what really fascinated me was not necessarily what the creature had done, but the fact that there was so much corroborative evidence to go along with that. The tree pulled down, the tree breaks, right, and actually seeing where something very large had walked. And the only thing larger than that would have been a moose. And frankly, I would have recognized the moose pretty quickly, other than the moose sign. So whatever it was pretty large. Walked through there, walked down to the road, and then a week and a half later, we get another sighting down the road. Just amazing.
Fascinating. Now, have you ever investigated or received reports of other types of creatures, cryptids? And the reason I'm bringing that up is there's a phenomenon that's going around right now that seems to be very popular amongst people, and I don't know what to think of it myself. Is the Dogman phenomenon, and I know that. I'm sorry to interrupt. That is kind of a weird thing that's been going on around a lot lately. I mean, in one aspect, you can laugh it off and say, well, how ridiculous is that? But then at the same time, you could say the same thing about Bigfoot. And yet there's a lot of evidence that suggests, not only by witness testimony, but evidence collected that there is some type of creature out there like that. Now, I've talked with a lot of investigators and people who seriously believe in the phenomenon, and I just struggle with that. It's one of those things where, okay, I do have an open mind. Hell, I'm a paranormal investigator. I've investigated everything from ghosts to aliens to, you name it. But when it comes to that type of creature, I'm really on the fence. And let's face it, the dog, we call it dog man, or there's the wolf man, or there's European werewolf lore. It goes back for centuries of tales of, hybrid type humanoid creatures. But at the same time, it's one of those things that just kind of defies defies my senses of belief. And I just didn't know what your thoughts are on something like that.
Well, I actually sit on the same opinion of you. I'm kind of on the fence. My own tenants say, hey, keep an open mind, but don't throw, science out. Don't throw, reality out when investigating claims. Could a fair amount of these be a misidentification of a Sasquatch? Could it be a misidentification of a bear? that's just walking on its hind legs sometimes? I don't know the answers to this because I've never really had we haven't, at least not to my knowledge, not in any of my areas that I've worked over the 20 years consistently, has there been a dogman sighting report? So I leave that to other really well-minded individuals. If I get one here in New York, well, then I guess I'll have to dig in. But I haven't. But, it's, you never know. But then again, it's kind of, I'm on the fence about it too, that, but what did they really see then? Did they see a bear? Did they see a wolf? I don't know. Did they misidentify a Sasquatch? It's the only thing I can, really think about. And, not being an expert on that, not being a researcher on that, I'll have to defer that question, but I'm kind of on the fence myself about it.
I know there was a researcher. He passed away here recently. I think you're familiar with him because I think I saw his pictures on your page. J.C. Johnson out of the Four Corners area.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good friend of mine. Spent a lot of time in the field with him, too.
Yeah. And J.C. had been a guest on our show many, many years ago. Mm-hmm. And I respect him, yet one of the things that he used to talk about investigating was reports of centaurs. Four-legged horse-like human upper half types of creatures. And I'm going, I don't know. You instantly want to snicker at something like that, but then that's again what the press does, what the public does when you talk about other things that we know that there's something going on there. And I personally feel like the world is a hell of a lot stranger than we realize because we grow up with certain programming and conditioning to believe the world works certain ways. And, as a paranormal investigator myself, I've had plenty of personal experiences with the strange and unusual that you could try to convince someone else and they're just going to laugh at your face because they don't want to believe it. So I don't know, I still have a ways to go on those. And I agree with you about not having a mind so open that your brains are going to fall out.
Right.
You got to keep things real scientifically. So what's coming up for you in the future? And do you have other investigations planned?
All the time. We do investigations on the fly because you never know when you're going to get a report. I do know that I have a couple of forays into the forests coming up real soon. I also have a pretty... This is the time of year where I do a lot of shows. I've actually been really good. I think I only down to 4 this year. Last year at this time, I had 6 lined up, and it was just like every weekend there was a show. But this year, I definitely one of my favorite places to go is the Scarefest down in Lexington, Kentucky. And what a great show! We'll be in Paranormal Row with a bunch of folks, the Ghost Brothers, the fellas from Ghost Asylum, the Tennessee Wraith Chasers.
Yes.
I think Steve and Tango will be out there. I think they're across from us, or the Ghost Brothers are across from us. And there's a bunch more. Kim Russo will be out there. So really, I'm representing the crypto side of things out there this year. Last year, they're more fictional than they are anything else. The Mountain Monsters were there last year. They're a bunch of guys. But,
I have to tell you right now, Mountain Monsters is my absolute favorite guilty pleasure show.
It is. And I'll tell you, those guys are just as cantankerous in person as they are on the TV show.
Yep. I love watching those guys. When I first started watching the show, it had already been out a few seasons. I came late to the party, and I started watching it. I'm sitting here laughing my ass off half the time with these guys, in the woods. And I know it's television. I understand that and how they set some of the stuff up, but good Lord, how are you going to catch anything in the woods when you're screaming, hooping, and hollering the way that they do? Oh, let's go get that son of a bitch.
But I got to tell you, though, they are, if you get them aside, talking with Huckleberry, very smart man. Trapper, very smart man. I mean, they know their forest. They know their stuff. That's why they got picked for what they do. Each one has their own little talents. Wild Bill is just a wild ex-Marine. So, but yeah, they are a swell bunch of guys. And, so I have that lined up at Scarefest. I'm not seeing the Mountain Monsters boys. I got to throw a shout out to Rick McCallum and Kane Hodder and RJ. The Hollywood Ghost Hunters, they're going to be there again, too.
Oh, great.
And a bunch of other celebrities. And their main headliner this year is Tobin Bell from Saw.
Okay, yes.
So that's really cool. Then, and a couple of weeks later, we have the Whitehall Sasquatch Calling Festival, and I'll be up there with authors, a couple of authors, Paul Bartholomew, Bill Brand, Brian Goslin will be up there. He was the police officer who had the sighting in '76 with the incident A Bear, and Frank Cicienski, who had the Vermont Trail Cam photo. So it's going to be a good old time there, and it's always a fun event. And we get a lot of reports when we're up there talking to people. So that's always a pleasure meeting the people at Whitehall. And there's a lot of people that come from all over the place there that like to go to that. And then I think one of the weeks I'm doing the Plymouth Paracon. I'll be out there. And finally, I always wrap up the year with the Chautauqua Lake Bigfoot Expo. I actually was so busy last year, I didn't get the chance to go there. So it's the only one I've missed, and I'll be back again this year. I'll be with, I believe, Mark DeWorth. I got to look at my lineup here, but and Paul Matei, who's a BFR investigator on the western part of the state. So that'll be a great time as well. And then next year, in the first weekend in June, we're doing the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Camping Adventure.
Yes, with Eric Altman. Yes,
Eric Altman.
Eric's
yep.
a friend of mine. Yes.
Excellent. Yep, and we'll be doing that, and that's going to be a fun time. So hopefully, maybe you can make it down.
Oh yeah, I'm going to try to make it to that one. Definitely.
Awesome. And so that's what I got going on. I'm still in the process of writing my third book. I have no timeline on that, and of course, I'm working on I don't know if it's going to be a story or a documentary yet. I did some crowdfunding; it did not work. So, but I have in the formulations a piece of work called The Bigfoot Cold Case, and it's about the creature, written by Jan Clement. And I got some good information on that and the identity of who Mr. Clement is. And, we'll roll from there. But I, always keeping my hands in the pie, and that's not counting any paranormal investigations or Bigfoot investigations or whatever may come my way.
Now, Steve, your current two books, What Would Sasquatch Do in 50 Large, The Real Story of the Georgia Bigfoot Body Hoax, where can people get those books?
They can get them off my website currently. I believe What Would Sasquatch Do is actually they may be both available on Amazon now because they did some switching over at my publisher Create Space, and now they eliminated the web pages we had, and they have them for sale on Amazon.com, or you can go right to the website, order a book, and that way I control it. And what we'll do, and I know there's overseas stuff because it's overseas, but we'll figure that out. But the best way to get it is Amazon UK actually has my books. So Amazon UK for our UK listeners, and for the USA listeners, they can just click on my website to get an autograph one.
Fantastic. Well, Steve Kull has been our guest tonight. Steve, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a fantastic talk. I hope the 2 hours just flew by for you.
Really did.
Well, thank you again for coming on, and I want to thank everybody for listening to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio. Tune in every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. Greenwich Mean and Eastern Time here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. We'll be back next week with myself and Irene Allen Block with a new show. So everyone, have a great evening, and we'll talk with you soon.